Checking, checking. Checking, checking. How's this? Oh, okay. Welcome to a Saturday with Clear Mountain. Good to see everyone. Just to welcome a few unique visitors, we have Jessica and Christine visiting from Portland, Friends of Dhamma. Jessica and Christine's hiding somewhere. There. Okay, good. So feel free to say hello to them. We also have Deb, who's been joining us on Zoom for many years and just attended in person first time. And we have Yotam visiting from Israel, maybe. Maybe not, though. Okay. Well, anyways, we have an announcement, I think, from Gary, perhaps.
For the use of this space thank you. For the use of this space every week, we're glad to put out a Dana box to show our gratitude to the cathedral and the community over there for this space. And so we just want you to know that it's back on the table along with all the books that are free. And so, and there are other things on the table. They'll let them talk about it.
There's so many things on the table, but those are definitely two of them. And thank you, Gary. Additionally, in showing our gratitude, just in the holiday spirit, we've put two gratitude thank you from Claremont to St. Mark's Cathedral and Amistad School. So if people have the time and inspiration, you can just go back and sign that. Once again, St. Mark's has just opened up their space to us with no obligation. It's pretty amazing, and so just expressing our gratitude for that. Additionally, Rahul, can you raise your hand? So we mentioned last week, Rahul's our new librarian, Sadhu Rahul, and helping step in for Mudita, who can't make it now. She did a wonderful job. And if you're going down to Abhayagiri, please do talk to Rahul, because the Abhayagiri sends us lots of books, and Rahul can coordinate with you to maybe take some books back to us, and maybe send some books to them too, a little bit back and forth. So thank you, Rahul. If you also have extra books that you would like to put into circulation here, Rahul can give them a look over and see if they're appropriate for the table. Many of you know we have a New Year's Eve vigil. We mentioned this before, but just if you're not doing anything on New Year's, or even if you are, maybe we're even better. So we're having an all-night vigil at Fauntleroy Church, and you don't have to stay all night. It's on Zoom and YouTube as well, but if you can join in person, it's a lot of fun. Bonnie.
And the sign-up sheet for volunteers is still on the table. There are a few small needs left. If people can look, mainly transport and registration fees. So find me if you're interested.
Find Bonnie for helping out with that. Additionally, we've said a few times we could use a few more Saturday setup and takedown volunteers. So if you're available to help just with that generally, speak to Gary or Aruna or Janaki. Yes, those three. And finally, we aren't going to be having we were floating the idea of having a kind of monthly huddle for volunteers, but honestly, everyone here is doing a great deal, and we decided that it's, more beautiful just to have this space open and the monastics up here for these brief few moments every week when we get the chance to. So we won't be doing those monthly huddles in the same way, but we're here to speak with everyone after the gathering. And today we'll be having a kind of inventory of all the stuff that accumulates. So people can hobnob and speak to one another until about 11:40. And then for those who are interested and inspired, we could use some help in terms of coordinating with Janaki specifically in terms of, I think that's it. Anything else? Okay, great. We'll begin with a chant. So if people can turn to page 37, the Buddha's Words on Loving Kindness. If you're joining us on Zoom or YouTube, you should see the link to the Amravati chanting book in the chat or description. And once again, that's page 37. Now let us chant the Buddha's words on loving kindness. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duty, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world.
Okay, so having chanted together, come into the space together, we can sit together, do some meditation for about 20 minutes. And I'll give a little bit of guidance on what I call sprout body practice. So maybe not the most seasonally appropriate, but it's basically a modified way of doing breath meditation in a way which is lively and fresh. So just to start with, you can just shake your shoulders a little bit, get a little bit of this winter cold out of the body, get a little bit of flexibility going in the upper body. And when things feel a little bit dislodged from any kind of frozen state, just coming into the posture. And with the sprout body, we can imagine that basically from the waist down is under the ground. And we can just let our root extend downwards, expanding the spinal cord, this central stem, central axis. Let it seep and extend downwards. And at the same time as the sprout roots go into the ground, the sprout stem, our spine extends upwards. And we've got this organic, fresh flexibility in the upper body. And this sense of freshness is one which we'll keep coming back to through the meditation. Both a bodily freshness and aliveness and a mental aliveness and clarity. And like a sprout, we just bring awareness to this gaseous exchange, the breathing process. Becoming aware of the full in-breath and the full out-breath. And sprouts and plants will take in gas and expel gas just all throughout the fresh stem and the leaves. And similarly, we can imagine and come to be with feeling the breath in the whole body. This aliveness of inhale as the lungs expand. And the softness and giving as we exhale. And the meditation posture isn't one of angularity and holding, but it's a dynamic process that part of the mind can attend to. And if you find the body leaning forwards, maybe with anticipation, or leaning back with any kind of apprehension or downward slumping, uptightness. Just come back to that freshness, this image of the sprout body. We can note the full body. Just as a sprout is the tiniest thing, and you can perceive it with just a single glance, so too we can feel the whole body. Sometimes it seems huge, but looking another way, it's quite small. And we can get our whole mind around it, through it. And then just staying in this place of care. Knowing the full inhalation and the full exhalation. And continuing to grow just naturally, organically upwards. Totally natural. Just breathing light. you find your mind rushing off or thinking about something way over there, not with the breath, the aliveness right here. Just notice if there's any bodily stiffness that comes along with that. And you can bring it back. Bring the awareness back. Fully embodying this alive organism. Learning to see and to be with the beauty of a breath. Breathing upwards to the skies, downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded. Just allowing all the rigidity of body to just calm and relax and soften with the warmth of attention. Knowing every in-breath and every out-breath. And just in the last few minutes of a meditation, especially in a group, it can be good to practice loving kindness. We've been training with this embodiment. We continue that here with the deep roots of wholesome intention, firmly dipping into the ground and this aliveness coming up the spine. Continuing to pay attention to the breath, but just adding the wish with every in-breath, may I be well. And with every out-breath, may all beings be well. May I be well, and may all beings be well. It's totally permeable membrane, this omnidirectional well-wishing. And that exhaling wish that all beings be well, it doesn't have to have a limit. It can just keep going in every direction, around and everywhere. You can imagine if on this little sprout body, if there were any flower buds, this is when they'd start to open. May I be well, and may all beings be well. Just sharing the beauty of this with the world. And I'll ring the bell. Please do not stop breathing. So before we start the formal talk, now is a time when people want to shift posture, stand up, shake your bodies, and then we'll start the Dhamma talk.
For those of you who are interested, we do a formal request of a Dhamma talk, and it's totally optional. If you'd like, you can follow along on page 124 in the chanting book. Brahmachaloka dipati sampati katanjaliyana ramaya chata inasada paradise jataka Dhammam anukampimam bhajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. I really like that image of the sprout body because it's something that you can take off of the cushion. We can bring this sense of aliveness and freshness to our bodies and our minds throughout the whole of the day. This is a really wonderful way to live the Dhamma, to bring the Dhamma into daily life, is to realize that there's a very intimate connection between what the body's doing and what the mind's doing. And there is this connection between the sense of tightness and bodily constriction and holding in different spaces with the similar aspects of tightness and mental rigidity. So if you just try to have this felt sense, full body, relaxing, coming back to a sense of flexibility throughout the day, throughout conversations, really anytime you can, that's a really good for the mind as well. So on this theme of roots and being rooted, thought to speak about a list which everybody might not yet be familiar with, and that is the list of 3 wholesome roots and the 3 unwholesome roots. Maybe just get a show of hands. Anybody, if you've heard of the 3 wholesome roots, you can lift your arm up like a little sprout stem. Okay, got some people, but a lot of people who haven't heard of them. It's a really useful framework. Most of us, I think, who weren't born into a Buddhist culture, we come to Buddhism or come to the Dhamma, come to meditation through meditation, for meditation, and our conception of what the Buddha's teachings can give are quite limited, and it's really just an exercise, maybe even just a technique that we do when we're sitting. But this framework of the 3 wholesome and unwholesome roots are really a whole framework for life, because the idea of karma or kamma in a Buddhist context is not something that we're doing just when we're sitting on the cushion. Karma literally means just action. And specifically, what is karma? Karma is intention. So we're doing karma through the whole of our days, every day, all the time. And to have a bigger picture of what the Buddha's teachings, what the Buddha actually said we can do with the mind, and what the mind's doing even when we're not realizing that it's churning away. So introduce these, first the 3 unwholesome roots. This is greed, anger, and delusion. Greed, anger, and delusion. And in a Buddhist context, raga, dosa, and moha, or lobha, dosa, and moha. And these are qualities of mind which are always unwholesome. And what does that mean? Are they unwholesome because the Buddha said they were unwholesome, or because some deity said that they're evil, so therefore they're evil? Not so much. The Buddha gave the reason why these mind states are unwholesome. It's because they lead to our own affliction, to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both. They hinder wisdom, and they don't lead to liberation. I think a couple years ago, came across this this theory, this technical theory called the Unified Theory of Muppets, the Unified Theory of Muppets. And it basically correlates different mind states and different personalities with different Muppets. And these three, just a way to help you memorize these three unwholesome roots, which are also wanting, that which leans forward, wonting, that which pushes away, and wandering, that which just goes all over the place. So the Muppet which represents greed. Anybody? I've got one in mind, but Christine. Cookie Monster, yep. Yep, that's what I was thinking too. Cookie Monster. And this isn't a fully developed theory. I don't think anyone's won any Nobel Prizes with this one yet, and the Muppet for aversion or anger or Oscar the Grouch, yes. It's like you already knew, you've already done the experiments. And the last one is a little bit hard. Who is the Muppet for delusion? We're including Sesame Street characters in this as well. Someone said Big Bird? Elmo. I'm going to cut it off because I don't want people to get offended. I was thinking Snuffleupagus, that big old elephant, kind of lumbering along, elephant-like shaggy thing. But these Muppets and their equivalent, the opposite of these, are also the case. So whereas we can lean into the greed and the anger and the delusion, we can water these unwholesome roots, their opposite also exist. And this is the path of non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion. So, and each of these three run the whole spectrum of their unwholesome and wholesome equivalents. So greed is an umbrella term for every inclination towards wanting. It's greed, it's craving, it's desire, it's even just the kind of unhelpful liking that's going to get you maybe into trouble. And similarly with anger, it's the whole spectrum of dislike and hatred and vehemence, and everything just pushes away from sense contact. And delusion is the whole realm of just being confused about it all. And on the opposite side, non-greed is just the absence of greed. Non-anger is the absence of hatred, anger, and non-delusion is the absence of that. But you can also conceive of it in their positive equivalent. So non-greed is not just a blank absence, which by itself is good. If we could just abide in not disliking, if we could just abide in a state of non-greed, that would be enough. But if we can take it to the next level and actually bring up a mind of generosity, a mind of giving, that's a root which has been thoroughly watered and well looked after. In this whole realm of non-anger, that when you feed it and when you nourish it and mature it, then that is the whole sphere of loving kindness and friendliness. And non-delusion can really become wisdom. So we've got giving and loving and just living. And by living, this is the non-delusion of non-reactivity. Like a truly lived life is one which isn't a slave to all of our just habits and reactions. So genuinely living is the non-delusion. And these three wholesome and unwholesome roots work on multiple different levels. They work on the level of ethics or morality. They work on the level of psychology. They work on the level of personality and on the level even of cosmology. And it's so useful to have this framework and you can think about it. You can just think about it. Is what this monk is saying, does it actually make sense, and might it be useful? And the Buddha gave this framework as a useful compass with which we can gauge our life and our intentions. And it's not like these are given to us. You know, we're born into a human existence, and we're not given a map. We're not given an instruction manual. Our cultures and our families are just an utterly mixed and confused bag of this and that and the other, and there's just no clarity. You know, we're getting so many mixed messages from the media and from our parents and schools and society and our bosses and our workplaces, and there's just not a coherent narrative to the whole thing. There's not a coherent story to the whole thing. And what the Buddha is providing here is not just a story. It is a great story. How can I incline my life towards non-greed, towards this giving, towards non-anger, towards loving, towards non-delusion, towards like living, actually being awake in this life, and away from wanting and wonting and wandering. It's a great story, and the Buddha said it's actually true. True in what sense? In that it leads to affliction for oneself, for others, for both, and leads away from wisdom. And it's done that since the time of the Buddha. And yeah, the Buddha just says this is a matter-of-fact state of how human psychology works, that greed will lead to affliction, self-affliction, affliction of others, and affliction of both. And these, when we water them, it manifests. These things sprout. So you can imagine in front of you, you've got, say, a pot on your right side, and you've got a pot in front of you on the left side. And the left-hand pot is filled with all the seeds of greed, anger, and delusion, of wanting, and wandering. And I won't try to species shame or anything and say that these are things like, you know, thistle or nettle or anything that's going to hurt you, because there's good uses for those. But unlike these, mixed are really unwholesome. It's like stank wood or nasty vine or doo-doo berry. And they're just poisonous. They're just toxic. And it will hurt you and your kids. There's nothing redeeming about these. And then on the other side, we've got all the seeds and the growing sprouts of non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion, of giving and loving and living. And all the time, we are watering these, whether it's a fire hose, when we're just yelling at our spouse and gobbling away at all the leftovers, or just wallowing in whatever Netflix series for 48 hours. The fire hose of greed, anger, and delusion, or the fire hose of giving and loving and living, of really just, I've spent 2.5 hours making this dish, and I'm going to give it to my family, I'm going to give it away, and all the beautiful actions that really, when they come together in a wholesome, beautiful celebration, it really does. You can see the flowers are just blooming all over the place. Or if it's a trickle, we've got our watering can and we're watering one or the other. Or if it's just the drip line that we've got going out. The water is dripping out all the time. We're feeding, we're watering some of these seeds all the time. Even when we're just vegetating and, just doesn't seem like, just navel-gazing or whatever kind of things that the ways we spend our time. It's good to realize that the water drip is on and inclining in the direction of the beautiful flowers and the sweet fruit of giving and loving and living. So these things feed our ethics, our sense of morality. Once a month, we chant the 5 precepts. These are the basis for a Buddhist sense of ethics. So refraining from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from lying, and from taking intoxicants. And why do we do all those? Why do we do any of them? Because of greed, anger, and delusion. Because we haven't been paying attention to the mental habits of hating so much that we want to kill, or even being so annoyed that we just, smash that bug. Because the Buddhist sense of ethics of non-killing does include animals and insects. We break the precept of sexual misconduct because we just allow the mind to stare a little bit too long or pay attention in a way which takes us outside the bounds of the trust relationships that we have. We lie because we want, or because we hate, or because we're just deluded about things and it's a bad habit. And we take some intoxicants because it gives some kind of pleasant feeling. So the more we can pay attention to these stories and this truth of that these roots, when we water them, when we allow the mind, what is the cause, the Buddha said, what is the watering of greed? He said, unskillful attention, ayoniso manasikara, to the sign of the beautiful, to the sign of the beautiful. So if we're married, or if we're a monk, or if we're a nun, paying too much attention to the sign of the beautiful in another person, such that it manifests in breaking our precept of breaking our vows with other people and transgressing sexually. That's, you see the suffering that comes from that really quickly. So watching that, how are we watering these states of mind? What is the watering of anger? It's unskillful, unhelpful, ayoniso manasikara, inappropriate tension to the sign of aversion. We just pay too much attention to that which we don't like until we swat the mosquito, or we kill the thing, kill whatever it is that we don't like, the painful sensation. Paying unskillful attention to dukkha vedana, to the sign of aversion. And delusion, what's the watering of that? Is just unskillful attention in general. So we can water all the opposites of those as well in our ethical conduct, just paying more attention to the beautiful acts of generosity that you can read about, that you can see in your lives, that you can see in your family, that you can remember yourself doing, all the beautiful actions of kindness, of loving kindness that you've been shown through your life, watering these healthy, sweet fruit as well. So that's the level of morality. And on the level of psychology, we talk about these 5 hindrances of greed, anger, sloth and torpor is the 3rd one, or restlessness and anxiety is the 4th one, and then doubt. And these 3 unwholesome roots are really what waters these as well. So the first 2 are just direct, they're the same. The unwholesome root of greed or wanting is the mental hindrance of craving. The mental hindrance of aversion is the unwholesome root of disliking or aversion, of hating. And this drowsiness, this sloth and torpor, can come from an overly watered, a soggy root of liking or of disliking. We zone out, we forget, we fall asleep, we tune out, we phase out, we let the mind wander. We fall asleep, either because we want the pleasant sensation of that, or we don't want the unpleasant sensation that comes from just being awake. sometimes being awake is a little bit painful. It is a little bit painful. And the mind is just an unconscious habit that's so easy to pick up. It's like the mind senses something that we don't like in meditation, and you can just conk out. You can just, if you find yourself in meditation and you're like this, you're nodding, you're just hunched over, chances are that it's not like you've been dwelling in a blissful state for the last couple minutes. It's more likely that actually you've been zoned out for the last couple minutes and that you only realize it when you're half slumped. And so you can bring up that, again, this sprout body, just allowing the body. It does have this aliveness, and you can extend again. So leaning into this wakefulness and breathing in light. And restlessness, similarity, it can come from a root, a soggy root of craving. We want to think about that thing. We want to think about tomorrow or what we're going to do later today. We don't want to think about what happened yesterday, all of our regrets. And the literal translation of this hindrance of restlessness and worry is actually restlessness and remorse. And remorse, this like a morsel of food, or like the molars, this is what chews on our past. It's remorse. It's thinking about and disliking all the bad things or the things we regret in the past. So when we water greed and anger, it can lead to restlessness or doubt or drowsiness. So that's on the level of psychology, when we're not aware of how our mental streams are just dripping in the comic results of that. K-A-M-M-I-C, comic results. And these all they're the fruits of these really are, that's why we start to practice, is because when we start to practice after not having been cognizant and aware of what we're doing with our own minds and the effects that's having on us and our family, our lives are a mess. Our lives can be a mess, and our relationships can be a mess. And that's the fruit of not just having a framework of this. Is we've been feeding and nurturing and adding compost to the greed, the anger, and the delusion, the wanting and the wanting, and the wandering of the mind, all these thorny parts of the mind. And you're going to have a thorn bush if you keep watering the thorny seeds. And similarly, you can see it in other people, the fruit of watering seeds of goodness and giving, generosity, loving kindness, and clarity, a sense of clarity. So that's the level of psychology. On the level of personality, so there's a book called The Path of Purification that was written about 1,600 years ago, and it is rather fascinating. So written about 1,000 years after the time of the Buddha, and some of it is really insightful. Some of it you would find very boring, and some of it is actually hilarious, especially the section on personality types. So Buddhaghosa, the author of this book, an Indian monk living in Sri Lanka in about 600, 400 AD, writes about these Buddhist personality types where these underlying tendencies, these roots of greed, anger, and delusion manifest in typologies. So someone's a greed type or an anger type or a delusion type. And you see it, and Buddhaghosa describes these different personality types in hilarious ways, describing how the greed type walks. They walk in this really sensual way. Every step is just perfectly placed. And the anger type, they step and they dig their foot in with their heel, and then they stab their toes in and walking erratically, and they got their place they got to go. And the delusion type is just all over the place, and their legs are dangling. And how they eat, the delusion type eats sprinkling food all over the place, and they get food all over their face, smeared on their face. The anger type sleeps with a scowl. They throw themselves on the bed and then they sleep with the scowl on their face. And the delusion type sleeps on their belly. They just sleep on their belly. And it's hilarious how each of these types sweeps. So in monasteries, we don't have that much, we don't do that much, but we sweep a lot. So the greed type, they sweep perfectly, and there's no dust going everywhere because they don't want to get it in their mouth. And the anger type's just, I got to get this done, and sweeping everywhere. And the delusion type is just over here and over there. And so what type are you? And are you a greed type? Are you an anger type? Or are you a delusion type? And it's good to realize that actually we're all three. All of us are all three. And to not hold this Buddhist typology, or really any type of personality system. A number of us have really been getting into the Enneagram and the fascinating nature of 1s through 9s. But in a Buddhist context, fundamental truth we always have to remember is there's no self here, there's no soul. We're not inherently a greed type or an anger type or a delusion type. But you do see these tendencies, and you can see the patterns in yourself. And these patterns come from just an unconscious drip of attention, just the earliest unskillful attention given to venting and to wanting and just spacing out, or to their opposites, the clarity that comes from steadily watering, the beauty of these wholesome roots. And then even on the level of cosmology. So a Buddhist cosmology, there are other realms in a Buddhist cosmology. There are these heavens and hells and hungry ghost states and states of titans, or these giants. And basically, whether you think about it as an actual place, an actual existence, or as just the personification of a mental state, or the spatial equivalent of mind states, heaven is basically greed perfected in a certain direction. If you're really good at your greed, then that'll lead to a heavenly-ish existence. And hell is hatred perfected. And the hungry ghost realm, or the animal realm, is basically delusion perfected. And you see it in yourself, we see it in ourselves, and we see it in the glows close around us. When we start feeling like an animal, we start giving vent and allowance to the different animalistic, deep natures within us. And it's nice to be a human. It's nice to be a human. And the uprightness, we can do that. We can do that. And so those are the unwholesome and wholesome roots. And non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. Non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. Not wanting, not wanting, not wandering. Is giving and loving and living. And these three, if you don't want to be Buddhist, if you didn't come here for the religion, that's totally cool. That's totally cool. If all the bowing makes you uncomfortable, no worries, no problem at all. But this is a way, our lives, even if we don't realize it, we got to serve somebody. Our minds, our intentions are, we're acting from some kind of hierarchy of what's worthy of a human life and what's unworthy of a human life. And I don't know, people when they're bowing to all sorts of stuff, but one way to make bowing meaningful is to make bowing meaningful. And if bowing to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, that just seems like some kind of hero worship, or it doesn't make sense to you, then bowing to these qualities of generosity and to loving kindness or friendliness and seeing clearly, bowing to non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion, because that's the direction. When we wake up in the morning as monastics, we bow. That's the first thing we do, because this is the direction. We aim in the direction of our shrine, and we bow 3 times. And we can bow to non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion. And maybe that will make more sense to you. And really each of these refuges, the Buddha is the perfection of non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion. The Dhamma is the perfection of non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion. And the Sangha are those people who've practiced that completely. And what is Nibbana? What is Nibbana? When you first hear it, it just sounds so mystical, and you don't even know what it is. You don't even know what it is. But one way the Buddha defined Nibbana, nirvana, the end goal of Buddhism, is the complete transcendence of greed, the complete transcendence of anger, the complete transcendence of delusion. So non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion are the path, and they are the goal. And we can orient our lives in that direction. If that sounds good, if you can see and you've tasted some of the fruits of these seeds, and yeah, we can just, the more we can make that conscious, then the more we'll lean in that direction. So leave the talk there for the morning and open things up for questions.
Andamayam Dhammakataya sadhu karam dadamase. Sadhu, 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 anumodam.
Okay, so we can open things up for questions, and I think Miles over there has a mic, so if you've got a question or a comment, you can just raise your hand and Miles will bring a mic to you. And same goes with people on Zoom. You can just raise your cute little cartoon hand and we'll call on you.
My question is, where does fear fall in the spectrum of greed, anger, and delusion? The way that you were describing fear, anger, it sort of feels like it would fall on that spectrum. But I'd like a little bit more clarification on that. And then, if it falls in the kind of anger spectrum, how do you dissipate fear?
It is its own flavor. And there's another list called the 4 biases. That's being biased by greed, by anger, by delusion. And the Buddha adds a 4th of being biased by fear. So the Buddha is highlighting there that it does have its own flavor. But when you feel it, when I feel it, it does have a similar character to, both delusion. It's somewhere in between the sphere of delusion and of aversion. I don't like this. I've some sense contact. I've seen something. My eyes have scanned the environment, and I'm afraid of that one thing. And one really useful tool for that, the Buddha said, he brings it up in the Bhaya Bhairava Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, says, when you notice fear in yourself, if you're walking, keep walking. If you're sitting, keep sitting. Down, keep lying down. If you're standing, keep standing. Or even more specifically, like if I'm looking in a particular direction and fear comes up, okay, don't automatically jut my eyes off to whatever it is that has piqued my fear, if it's truly not dangerous. And then just staying with that, because like, okay, fear has arisen, and I want to run in any direction that's not here. I want to look away from, or at, whatever that is. But just keeping that posture, the Buddha says, allows you to see, okay, the fear has come up, and the fear is shaking me, but I'm just going to watch it. And when you keep the body in a single posture, and just let the shaking take place, then it'll pass. It'll pass with time. And that's a good lesson to watch. I'd love to.
What's the Muppet? That's the Swedish chef's assistant, or the little beaker. One thing is, the Buddha labeled greed, hatred, and delusion, they're always unwholesome. And for those who aren't familiar with Buddhist language, there is a wholesome form of desire called chanda, which is zeal. So it's not like we give these things up and step into kind of a blank numbness. But the Buddha was, one of the things you begin to appreciate as you dive deeper into the teachings is the Buddha's nuance. he didn't put fear as one of the unwholesome roots for a reason, because there's a reason to be afraid sometimes. And the Buddha said there's 5 kinds of loss: health, wealth, relatives, right view, and morality. And he said of the first 3 are trifling. You will lose your health, you will lose your relatives, you will lose your wealth. But the last 2, right view and your morality, those are valuable things, and their loss is terrible. And you should be afraid to lose those. So if you find yourself leaning towards breaking a precept, it's good to recollect what are the consequences of this, not just in this life, but if you do believe in multiple lives, like what will the echoes of this be? And some of you know the Buddha talked about 2 guardians of the world, Hiri-ottappa, which is conscience and concern. So Hiri is kind of a sense of our own values and that disjunct between knowing something's beneath us, and then Ottappa is fear of the consequences of that action. And Buddhaghosa from the Visuddhimagga, which Ajahn Kovilo is referencing, it really is it has brilliant images in it, but he compares Hiri-ottappa to a spear, and one side is smeared with excrement, and that's Hiri. That's the sense of this is below us. You don't want to be touched by that. And Ottappa is a red-hot, glowing spear, and so the sense like these consequences really will burn. And I don't know if others have that experience of when you compromise your sila, you really feel vulnerable, and like there's a sense that you've opened up you're vulnerable in a way. So I'd say unwholesome fear, which is where most of us live a lot of the time, absolutely one wants to give it up. But the Buddha also did not list that under always unwholesome for that reason, I think, as well. Please. Can we get a mic for him? And Joseph, we might open up the space a little bit to those voices which are a bit less, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ajahn. So I'm here, I came from Israel. I'm here without my better half, my spouse. She's, okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah. And she's a really dedicated Buddhist. She was considering even becoming a nun. And her grandmother is now in great pain. And sorry. So I would like to ask only if it's suitable, if we could do a chanting to ease her pain. And I mean, as a dedication. And would like to thank you for what you're doing. We met people in Israel, in Thailand, who attend these meetings via the internet, and it gives them a lot of strength and comfort. So I'd like to thank you for that.
Yotan, right?
Yotam.
Yeah,
yes.
we mentioned you at first, and it's good to see you here. Yeah. How long are you staying for?
I'm going back tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm here with my sister and also my stepmother. There too.
Welcome both. Thank you so much for speaking to all this, and for coming and just being part of that wider community. And we'd be happy to do a chant at the end of this, and we could also step aside briefly after things have wrapped up and do a more kind of intimate chant briefly, if that would be helpful. So certainly.
Thank you.
And sorry, Joseph, I saw you didn't actually have your hand up. You just happened to be at the top of the screen. It's good. Oh, sorry, Joseph. Never mind, you do have your hand up. Sorry, I think we're going to keep this space open for a little bit more to those who speak a bit less today. Do we have any others in person? Kate?
Thank you for your talk, Ajahn Kovilo. And Ajahn Nisabo, you mentioned chanda as wholesome desire, and I'm wondering if you could speak more about chanda and how it is distinct from unwholesome desire, and how one knows the difference in lived practice between, and I'm thinking particularly here of wholesome desire for Buddha Dhamma Sangha, wholesome desire for awakening, wholesome desire for making progress on the path, and how that feels different from unwholesome desire of greed for sensuous things, for physical things. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. The distinction Kate's pointing to is the difference between wholesome desire, chanda, and unwholesome desire of tanha, or this unwholesome root of craving or greed. And it is really important to get a feel for how those are different, and then to really nurture the one and then abandon the other. With the unwholesome roots, there's often a sense of unbalance, like you're leaning so far that you're actually falling over, which you won't find in the balanced sense of chanda or wholesome desire, which is actually part of the path. It's part of right effort. So you generate desire, activate persistence, arouse energy, and pursue the cultivation of wholesome qualities and the abandoning of unwholesome qualities. You start to feel the micro facial expressions of greed versus greed, anger, and delusion, which, greed and anger can be coming from greed as well. And the wholesome Dhamma desire just doesn't have those same kind of the intensity of, the same physical tension that the others can have. But it can get quite subtle. I mean, you can see it in its gross forms, and like macro body gestures or movements, or the way that people hold their bodies and move in the world. But it can get subtle. And I think there is, I think that this sprout body, like the wholesome desire does have this kind of aliveness to it, whereas the unwholesome desire has it's starting to get tight. So just a general bit of the somatic feel to it. But Ajahn, I'd love it if you could fill it out.
Is Elmo chanda taken to an extreme a little bit much? Elmo's non-anger. Okay. No, that was a good answer. Just the intuitive feel of it, I think, over time. And I would say chanda has a lot to do with wanting to make things whole. What's that Judaic term for piecing together the world that's been broken apart? Telem? Shalom. Yeah, tikkun olam. Yeah, the idea that the world's been shattered into these broken pieces of God, and this desire to put it back together. Like, I think chanda often has this feel of making things whole again, and I think it's much more aligned with the dopamine system, which makes meaning, which is a huge source of our positive Vedana in life. And tanha has a lot to do with consuming in the serotonin system and satiation. And just think the Cookie Monster, it's so right on. And I think chanda has a lot more to do with enjoying the process, like when you really get into writing something or doing something beautiful, whereas tanha has a lot to do with fixation on the end and getting something. And tanha is suffering. Like, if you're really binging, it's painful. Like, you want it to be over almost. Like, you want to get to the end of, like, the Cookie Monster's not having fun. you know, and I think that's another metric as well. Do you know more Muppets than I do, Ajahn? I'm sort of out of the...
I don't know. I didn't want to go with which one epitomizes giving and loving, and because there's just so many giving and loving Muppets. Yeah, yeah. But Elmo is, I don't even, tickle me Elmo. Does anybody remember that guy? Yeah. Hug me. Yeah, it's non-hatred epitomized. Joseph, if you...
Thank you, Ajahn. So I'm doing some research on the work on compassion and empathy that was done by Tanya Singer and Matthew Ricard. And what I noticed is that they showed that one can develop mindfulness as a practice, one can develop compassion as a practice, but a separate thing which didn't necessarily come about from cultivating mindfulness and compassion was perspective taking. Being able to see, it's known as theory of mind, or recognizing, okay, what's it like to be Ajahn Kovilo? What's it like to be Ajahn Nisabo? What's it like to be this person? I was wondering if in the Theravada tradition, does this sound familiar? How would one train in cultivating perspective of, or theory of mind, or being able to see the perspective of others? Because I feel like this would benefit myself, others, and both. Thank you.
Just say something quickly and then pass it to Ajahn. There's a really powerful pairing of suttas called the Dukkata and Sukkata Sutta. And the Buddha says, whenever you see someone come on hard times, struggling, you should think, I too, in the course of this long, long wandering on through samsara, have experienced just this sort of thing. It is enough to become dispassionate, enough to lean towards nibbana, to stop swelling the cemeteries. And when you see someone come on good times, successful, happy, you should think, I too have experienced just this sort of thing in this course of this long, long time. It's enough to become dispassionate, enough to incline towards nibbana, enough to stop swelling the cemeteries, which is a great phrase. But for me, that is the beauty of a wholesome holding of rebirth, is the sense of we've been each other's mothers and brothers and sisters and enemies and friends, and just the equalizing effect in terms of really coming to that, and the idea that what we all do share is dukkha, and finding your way to someone's root of dukkha, and the compassion that's hiding there.
Yeah, I think a type of higher order thinking. So if you're able to just, usually we're just all caught up and knotted in our own views and likes and dislikes of the world, just totally tangled within our own tangle. But if you can just let the mind just come to just get some level, it's like you're walking up onto whatever kind of walkway this is. It's really crowded up there if you actually go. There's like chairs, all sorts of weird stuff up there, but coming up and you can just look down and just you're looking at the whole situation, and it looks really different from up there. And similarly, if you can, this third foundation of mindfulness, one knows the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, putting aside one's biases, what one likes and dislikes, and then one does that internally and externally. You recognize mind in and of itself. This is a mind, if it's internally, this is a mind of greed, and you can know the greedy mind as a greedy mind, and that knowing of a greedy mind as a greedy mind is not actually greedy in itself. Similarly, if you see someone else doing something which seems like it's coming from a greedy mind, knowing the greedy mind, the hatred mind externally as what it is or what it appears to be, but just not being biased, not hating the one and wanting the other. So, yep, see if you can lift the mind up a bit, out of its own tangle. Maybe one last question, if we had it.
Hi. I got really struck by the words unskillful attention to aversion, and spent a lot of time kind of percolating on what, because I have a lot of that, but I don't have a lot of anger. It just kind of like I pay attention to my aversion unskillfully, and it ends up in avoidance and fear. And so I started thinking about what would be the skillful attention to aversion, because, sometimes aversion is protective, sometimes like we really need to step away from something or someone's behaving really badly. And so you don't want to be like, not paying attention to that at all. But how do you do it skillfully? 'Cause like avoidance and fear hasn't worked really great. Anger, probably not good either. What do you do? How do you just sit with it? Or do you just sit with it?
I love that you used the word percolating for that, percolating on your anger, aversion, because it's the exact, that is the issue with ill will, is a constant, that's the drip line for most of us, I think, actually. It's interesting, of the 3 wrong intentions in the second factor, the Noble Eightfold Path, it's the intention towards kama, sensuality, the intention towards ill will, and the intention towards cruelty. And 2 of those 3 are aversive, because I think for many of us, it's just one of the easiest things to kind of dwell in, with that drip line of just a steady drip of aversion in one way or the other. So I think it's really important to keep an eye on. And Ajahn Brahmali says our daily mindfulness should have 2 chief functions, often for many of us, to keep our ethics and to not dwell in aversion. So I think there's a lot of, sometimes it is just enough to name it, aversion. But that can become a bit of a cop-out, because really sometimes the coals are still smoldering, and you really have to take seriously that drip line, because it will feed that. One very powerful means is just to label unpleasant feeling, like dukkha vedana, like it hurts to be angry, and just labeling the feeling before that's undergirding all of the proliferation that's on top of it just undercuts it. Other times you really have to give attention to the bright point of the person you're thinking about. Other times just bring to mind a wholesome object like love or something. Other times lean into gratitude, and just, if we didn't have people who pushed our buttons, how would we learn to grow in patience and wisdom and care? There's a story of the first teacher to bring Buddhism to Tibet, and they said that he'd heard that all the Tibetan people were really nice, so he brought his really annoying chaiwala with him, so he'd have someone to practice with. So, and it's true, like that's how we grow, and there is a space for looking at those people with gratitude. So I'd say really being aware of that drip line, and how to know whether your attention is unskillful or not. I think it's just something you get a sense for over time. And you can really hear the difference in tone between Mara's voice in your head, like, come on, how could they possibly do that? Versus the Buddha's voice. It's not actually the Buddha's voice, but that voice of wisdom that's like, and sometimes it can be very clear, like, this is enough. But those are 2 very different tones. And like Ajahn Kovila was saying with fear, where when it comes up, the Buddha's instruction is to not change posture. When anger or aversion comes up, to know that your duty is not to feed it or react to it, but wait until it passes and then make your decision from that place of coolness on the other end. And then you'll have a clear picture. Ajahn Mudito, in an interview we did with him recently, said, sensuality will pretend it's your friend, ill will pretend it's necessary, delusion will pretend it doesn't exist. So I thought those are very good. One more, do you think maybe we call it good? What do you think? We'll call it, unless we have one more itching to ask a question. Okay, good. Sorry. So we'll end with our chanting requests. Maybe Milo or Cheryl could read the list of people under clearmountainmonastery.org. support, we have a chanting request page where you can enter those we'd like to hold in our hearts and dedicate goodness to.
Okay, we have Erica, Jayanta's mother, Jana's grandmother, ill, near to passing, spread metta. Gordon B, coming towards the end of a long life, struggling with situation, please spread metta. Raymond N, just passed from cancer, please spread metta for a good rebirth. David, nearing the end of his life, peace and happiness to him as he approaches death. Sanja, passed Thursday morning, spread metta for a good rebirth and peace to her husband and 2 young children. Sacha Gudas, birthday of Sachi, having genetic disease, bedridden, 6 years of age, spread happiness and peace. Winnie and food bank friends. Winnie, our food bank friend, died in her sleep. Please spread metta and karuna for the threefold happiness of all beings. That's from Joseph. Thank you.
What was your mom's name? Spouse, you said? Spouse's grandmother, Annette. Annette. Okay, we'll spread, hold her in our hearts. Others? Marianne and Mike, who both have cancer. Kelly Donovan. Ryan. Juanita's, Bonnie died 1 year ago tomorrow. Jeff's mother. Brianna, but not the Brianna we're thinking of. That one too, though. What? Barbara, beginning radiation. Tommy? Brother David. Brother David. Brother David. Two David. Okay, so we can just put those names for a few seconds before I think. You can just bringing those people into your people can turn to page 83, the verses on the Buddhist first exclamation, page 83. And we'll dedicate the merit of today to all those named and others in your heart. Handamayam patama buddha pasita gopade Visang anisang kaharang kaesanto kati untuan and of birth wandering honestly for the builder of this house I search how painful is repeated birth Sahakarakaditosi gunagehang nakas Patikabaga Visankaragatam Chitang Tanhanang Kaya Jaga. House builder, you've been seen. Another home you will not build. All your rafters have been snapped. Dismantled is your ridgepole. The non-constructing mind has come to craving's end. So just briefly before we wrap up, once again, there's 2 letters in the back for Amistad and Skinner if people want to sign. We'll have inventory at 11:40, so people can just maybe help out around then if they feel inclined. And Ajahn, would you like to do the introduction of new folks or the?
Yeah, so we're about to have opened up over at the food table. There's lots of food for everybody, lots today, actually. But before then, I just wondering if for the first, second, or third time, be willing or interested to just raise your hand and maybe say your name and how you heard about Clear Mountain. Yeah, please. Justin, welcome. Nice. Yeah. Sean, welcome. Welcome, Claire. Yeah. John, welcome. Oh, there's one more in the back. Oh, cool. Welcome, Sophie. Oh, yeah. Jonathan, welcome. Okay. Well, we do issue a challenge if anybody is up for seeing if one of the first few people that you talk to can be somebody that you don't know. It's a nice way to meet people, and there's a lot of nice people here. So, all right, we'll pay respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, non-greed, non-anger, and delusion, non-delusion. Feel free to follow along if you're so inclined, but no pressure. Zoom people and people on Zoom, you can stick around with one another. I think there's still Zoom tea time, but it's good seeing you.